Let's talk about aggregate functions. Aggregate functions allow you to perform calculations on a set of values. And after they're done, they return a single value. So let me just kind of show you what I mean. Let me get a new query window. I'm going to do a select. So let's say that I have the maximum value and a set of 1, 2, and 3. So if I did that, the maximum value would be 3. Now, I don't think the aggregate function will work this way, but it requires one argument, and the argument that it's looking for is the column you want to work with. So the column would be something like the unit price in the products table. .video.products. So that would give you, oh, I forgot the from clause, didn't I? Okay, so that will give you the maximum price. That's the maximum price right there. Notice that it needs an alias here, so as max price. Okay. Now you can go to minimum price by typing in min. Okay. You can go count. Count will tell you how many of these there are. There's 77 prices in there. I wonder if some of those prices are, let's go distinct. 77. Now if I go take a look at this, I'm going to go ahead and look at this. Unit price, where are you? Unit price right there. There's definitely some times. Here's 10, and here's 10. So even though I put the distinct in there, the count was actually counting the number of rows. How many distinct rows did it have? There were actually 77 rows, so distinct didn't work that way. Because the count function is just a little bit different. It just gives you the number of rows. There is one thing that is a little interesting. Count, if there's a null value there, it doesn't count that. If you want to see that, you can use the count all. With the count all, you just put a star in there, and then if there was any rows that had a null value in the unit price, that would still be counted. There's sum. So the sum, that totals everything up. And that's it. Max, minimum, average, sum, and count. That's pretty much it. So those are pretty easy to memorize. The hard thing to memorize for people is that when you get back more than one result, you have to group it. Show what I mean. Let's say that I want to look at these values and I want to say, okay, I want to organize it, but I want to organize it based on category IDs. So I want the sum per category ID, or maybe let's go with max again. So maximum price per category ID. Well, let me sort this out. So I'm going to go ahead and say order by category ID. Okay. So we've got category IDs here. And if I ask the question, what is the maximum price in that category ID? That's way over here. Let's sort it by price. So unit price, descending. Okay, so for category 1, the maximum price is $263.50. Okay, that's the maximum. But for category 2, it's $43.90. Now, why did it change? Well, that's because we grouped things by category 1, to come up with the maximum price for category 1, and then we group things by category 2 to come up with the total price for category 2, and then you group them for category 3 and so on. If you want to do that in your query, you need to actually enter the group by command. So it's group by category D. And now you'll see the breakdown. So that's exactly what we were seeing just a few minutes ago. I don't see the name of the category, so let's put that in here. How about category ID? And now I see the category ID, and sure enough, that matches what we saw earlier. Now there is a rule. If you try to do this without the group by, it's all kinds of confused because they didn't know what the heck you're talking about. You have category ID and you're asking for that, and category ID has a bunch of values, but this has only one value. This has one value. Category D has a bunch of values. You can't have a situation where you have a huge list of values like this. So you got like one value. So you have the one value, and that's 263.5, and then you get all these. That is not cool, as they say. So you can't have that. You can't have this. Because you've only got one of those aggregate results. That's an aggregate result, and all these other ones. It's mismatched. So anyway, the rule is quite simple. If you ever have a time where you have an aggregate function, which gives you a single value, and you have a column that gives you multiple values, you have to group them, which actually makes sense. I mean, we saw that grouping them made sense anyway. I want to group them to get the prices based on category D. Then I want to show the category D, so I put that in there so I can see it, and that makes sense. And if I forget to put the group by in there, I will get an error message. The good news is the error message tells you exactly what the problem is. The bad news is nobody ever reads the error message. I'm going to definitely get questions about, why am I getting this error message? I just don't understand. I can't understand. Why didn't you tell me what's going on? Well, I did tell you, and the tutorials told you, and the other videos told you. You were told many times, but there are still going to be people who don't read the error message when they get it. The error message is pretty simple. When you scroll sideways, it says you got to have group by. That's paraphrasing it, but that's pretty much it. You can't have category ID is invalid in the select clause because it's not contained in either an aggregate function or you don't have the group by. We don't have the group by. So please don't be the one that asks me that question. Every quarter, more than one student asks me that question. I don't know how to make it any clearer. If you have an aggregate function in one column and a non-aggregate column, you got to have group by, and the error message it tells you so. So I guess the thing to memorize is read the error message. Anyway, so maximum is 1. I can do it like this because I don't have need a group by there because I don't have anything but the aggregate. I get back a single value. When I get that single value, whatever the date was, in this case the date is, get back there. The date is 1998, 05, 06. So 1998, 05, 06. And then what it does is it says, hey, is the order date that value? And if it is, you get back the result. So this is known as a subquery. It's a query inside of a query. So I get back a single value. If you get back a single value, you can use the equal sign. We'll talk more about subqueries later. So you'll see an aggregate function. Like this just tells me when's the last date that somebody ordered something. That was a while ago. You can use maximum, minimum, and average count, but do be aware that they do exclude null values. So if I look at the ship date column in orders, I can see that there's at least two rows that have nulls. So if I look at the ship date, maximum ship date, it's May 6th, 1998, and the minimum date is June 10th, and 1996. So there's no nulls in there. That's because maximum, minimum, average, and sum, they skip over the nulls. In fact, count does too. Count won't see it. If you want to actually see the nulls, you have to use count all. So otherwise, it is excluding the null values. And sometimes that makes a difference. What I mean by that is consider the average price of something. So how do you get the average? Well, the way you get the average is you total a bunch of stuff up and then you divide it. So for example, if I had a value of 2 and then 3 and then 6, then what I would do is I total those up. So the total would be 11, excuse me. And then I divide 11 by 3. Because I have 3 values and the total is 11, and that's how you get the average, whatever that would be. So that's what we're doing here. We go through to get the average, we total up all the values and divide it. But since it excludes rows that are null, that may be or may not be what you want. So for example, if I look at this, the grand total of sum, that gives me this, but and that makes sense. On average, it gives me this. The number of sales was 16, but the number of entries, there are actually 18 rows in that sales table and titles table in pubs. Count year-to-date sales shows 16, and the way they got the average is they took 97,446 and they divided it by 16. They didn't divide it by 18 to get the average. And I know that because if you do the calculation, you actually just pull up a calculator and you do that, you'll see that, yep, it was divided by 16 to get this average number. That's because the aggregate functions, with the exclusion of count all, they don't use the null values. Now, that means that if you really wanted to divide it by 18, you could, but you'd have to do it yourself. I would come up with a sum, and then I'd divide it by 18 using count all. You can see that the numbers are different. So it's not a big deal, but you do have to pay attention that, if your calculations demand that the nulls be included at your organization for the particular task you're trying to do, then you need to include that. Now, people ask me, well, when will I know? Well, you'll know because there's a specific need for it. It's like, say, when do I know to get milk? Well, you know to get milk when you're out of milk and you're going to use it. So when do I know to use 16 or 18? You know it because you want a particular type of calculation. You want to not divide it by 16, which is the default. You want to divide it by 18 because at your company for the one thing you're doing that time, that's important to you. So you don't need to know exactly how to order milk or get milk. You just need to know that it's possible. And then when you need to do it, then you'll figure out how to get it, how to get to work. So don't stress too much about the fact that, when are you going to use it? Your brain is trying to tell you that. It's trying to tell you or ask the question, when am I ever going to use this, to save work, which is, admirable of the brain, but it doesn't do you any good if it basically stops memorizing a bunch of stuff to save work, and you end up not, memorizing things that are important. Know that aggregate functions do not normally count a null value, and you just kind of know that in the back of your head, and you can look up the rest. You don't have to memorize all the minutia, but you do have to memorize the big picture stuff. That's the big picture stuff. Now, you can use grouping for subtotaling. This is pretty handy. So I'm going to go through and look at titles. I only want to see a particular title. So BU 1032, that's a Busy Executives Guide. And if I look in the sales table and I only want to see that particular title, I can see that they sold 15 of that, 15 boxes of these books. Or maybe just 15 books, I don't know. But whatever it is, that's what they sold. Now if I use the group by statement, I can look at the sum, and sure enough, it adds those together, and I get the value of 15. There's another option you can add on that'll give you more subtotals. You can use the roll-up option. Now this is before the order by. The order by is the last statement. Group by happens before order by. If you put roll-up in there, it will give you the breakdown of all the subtotals. So I'm going to be seeing each of the title IDs. 15 for 1032, and 25 for 1111, and 35 for 2075, etc. This is the subtotals for each of those titles. That's grouping by the title ID, and I'm getting those subtotals. Now that's actually handy. The one that says null is the grand total. When I add up all those subtotals, what do I get? So the way you read this is, if I don't care about the title ID, so regardless of the title ID, I don't care about the title ID, what was the quantity? This was the total quantity. That was the sum, the total. But if I do care about the title ID, then for 1032 it was 15, 1111 is 25, and so on. So the roll up command will give you the subtotals. One thing you need to know though is that it's based on if you group by more than one column, and you can. If I want to see the store ID and the title, I can do that. I have to put the group, both the titles, both the columns that are not being aggregated have to be in there. Any column that's not being aggregated has to go in the group by statement. But if I do this and using rollup, then the order matters. If I'm not using rollup, the order doesn't matter. But with the rollup, if I do the store ID, I see the totals broken down by the store. So for this store, I sold 5 of these and 3 of these, and the grand total is 8 of 8 books for that one store. That's because store comes first. But if I switch these around, same query, but this is switched, then what happens is that it gives me the total breakdown by the title. Title comes first, and so you see the breakdown. 5 BU 1032, then 10, and that total is 15. So I don't care about the store. Regardless of the store, there's 15 of those books. Or I do care about the stores. I don't care about the books. Regardless of which book it was, the total for that store is 8. And if you want to see all the combinations, you can use the cube. I don't know why they didn't say all combinations or something like that, or they should have called this like, with subtotals, or this one with all subtotals. That would have been nice, but they didn't. They called it roll up and cube. I don't know what they were thinking. But it's pretty easy to figure out what's happening. What happens is that when you do this, you get all the combinations. So one combination is for that one store, or that one title, that's the number. For just the title, I don't care about the store, that's the number 20. So apparently only this store sold that particular book. And then I don't care about the title, and I don't care about the store. What's the grand total? That's that one. This one here is that store. Don't care about the title. There were 8 in that one store. 125 in that one store, etc. So this is a handy way to get a subtotal. Now I got to tell you, most reporting software does these roll up in cubes for you. So when you're actually doing your job, a real job, you probably won't be using cube and roll up, because the software that you use will often do the calculations for you, like Tableau or Power BI or even Excel will do some of those calculations for you. However, if you just want to get a quick, easy pull of data, you still need to use this, because it's the easiest way to get those grand totals and subtotals. So do keep this in the back of your mind. It's a handy way to get a quick and easy report of results. It's not great for presentation. It doesn't present very well. But it is good for just getting a quick look at your data. This is all part of the group by statement. And having is another part of the group by statement. You don't have the word having if you don't use group by. You don't have the word cube or rollup if you don't use group by. It's all part of that same statement. In fact, I probably should indent it. So what the having does is it goes through, after you get the grouping, it goes through and does a filtering. So it's kind of like a where clause, but it runs after the group by. The where clause runs before the group by. The having clause runs after. You don't use having very often, but basically what would happen is that it would only give you things that had aggregated up to above 100. So these are all data analytics statements. And if you're a data analyst, you are expected to know these basic statements. There's a lot of analytical data analyst jobs out there. In fact, it's a very hot field. And although you don't have to be a SQL expert to do data analytics, it certainly helps. And certainly you have to know the basics. It is expected that you know these basics. Most of the data that you're going to work with is probably going to be in a relational database. And if it's not most of the data you work with, at least some of it will be. So these basic statements are really important to your career. And even if you're a botanist or a biologist or a physicist, or you want to get into car sales, or it doesn't matter. If you want to pull data out of a relational database, you're going to have to learn how to use these statements. And if you know how to do it, and so many coworkers will not, I guarantee you, you will be way ahead of them. Even if you're young, you'll still have the advantage. They may have more experience, but you'll have a greater skill in using this stuff. So you always need an edge when you're young and you're just starting out. Having knowledge of technology is your edge. Make sure you learn this and use it. I think you'll find it is good for your career. Okay, that's it for this. Next thing up is you're going to do the lab with your teacher assistant, and then I will see you for the live lecture later on this week. Talk to you later.